Just as our economy is increasingly globalized, so too is our environment. This is true whether we're talking about the global climate, which is changing in unprecedented ways as a result of our use of fossil fuels, or about environmental impacts in particular places, such as areas that are being mined or deforested to make the products we consume. Many of the products we consume on a daily basis involve global connections at every step in their life cycles and have enormous ecological footprints. Take, for example, consumer electronics like the iPhone. The materials and components used to assemble an iPhone include rare earth minerals mined in Africa and Asia, microchips manufactured in Europe, and a host of other components sourced from around the world that are assembled in Chinese factories before being shipped to the US and other countries for retail. Then, when we discard our iPhones, some of them are recycled, but many of them end up in landfills, sometimes in countries that import electronic waste or e-waste in exchange for a fee. It's a story of constant movement, where we remain largely oblivious to the social and ecological effects of what we consume. We'll talk more about global circulation of toxic waste in an upcoming unit. In this unit, I'd like to focus on a lesser-known aspect of how our daily consumption practices link us to places and people around the world. In particular, I'd like to focus on how our consumption practices drive large-scale land acquisitions, or what is sometimes referred to as land grabbing. The fact is that many of the things we consume contain products derived from plants grown all over the world. Growing these plants requires land, and as global demand for commodity crops rises, so too does the demand for land on which to grow them. Now, the quest for commodity crops is nothing new. The market for spices, rubber, sugar, fruit, and other plant-derived commodities was a big part of what drove European and later US imperialism. Still, the recent surge is remarkable. According to the World Watch Institute, since the year 2000, more than 36 million hectares of land have been purchased or leased by foreign entities around the world, mostly for agricultural uses. That's an area approximately the size of Japan. And as of October 2015, another 15 million hectares were under negotiation. This renewed push for large-scale land acquisitions is driven by a number of forces. One is the rising cost of food, which reflects both a larger global population and an increase in per capita demand. For example, states in the Middle East with growing populations and little arable land are buying up agricultural land in Africa and other parts of the world to help ensure a stable food supply. Another related cause is the accumulation of land by speculators and investment funds, betting that food and therefore land prices will continue to rise. This helped contribute to the global food crisis of 2008, in which speculation on food commodities drove up consumer prices and led to riots around the world. There has also been a global surge in demand for palm oil, leading to the expansion of oil palm plantations throughout the tropics. More on this in a moment. And finally, the growing demand for biofuels has led to the rapid expansion of plantations of corn, cassava, sugar, and other first and second generation biofuel crops. Because many of these crops are also foods, their use as biofuels drives food prices even higher, thus contributing to the demand for large-scale land acquisitions. Large-scale land acquisitions have a host of social and ecological consequences. Proponents of these investments argue that they help lay the foundation for global food security, provide alternative sources of energy, and bring capital and jobs to impoverished regions. Critics argue that land grabbing benefits global investors while leaving local people and ecosystems to bear the long-term costs of monocrop agriculture. Large-scale land acquisitions often involve the consolidation of lands that were owned by smallholder farmers, who in turn become more vulnerable to volatility in commodity markets. Further, large-scale land acquisitions are a major driver of deforestation, particularly in tropical regions. Millions of hectares, for example, are being cleared in Southeast Asia to make way for monocrop plantations. Perhaps you've seen the devastating photos of orangutans affected by forest clearance in Malaysia and Indonesia. Returning to our original question then, how do our daily choices as consumers help to drive this trend? One way is through our retirement funds, some of which get invested in land acquisitions abroad. But let's take the more direct example of palm oil. When you go to the grocery store, chances are you've noticed the labels in the produce section identifying the geographical origins of various products: bananas from Guatemala, pineapples from the Philippines, strawberries from California. What you may not have noticed is that a variety of other consumer products, especially processed foods and cosmetics, contain palm oil. As I noted earlier, palm oil is produced on plantations in tropical regions of the world, and global demand for it has surged as consumers in the West have shunned trans fats. Demand has also spiked due to growing markets for processed foods, cosmetics, and cooking oil in developing countries. Finally, palm oil is used as a biofuel, which brings up another way in which our consumption drives land acquisitions. Government policies promoting the use of biofuels as alternatives to fossil fuels mean that we will increasingly find commodity crops like palm oil in the tanks of the vehicles that transport us around town. Europe's biofuel policy in particular has come under fire as a driver of deforestation. There is a push to switch to second-generation biofuels like switchgrass, which do not divert crops from the food system and can be grown in temperate zones. However, these crops also require land, and so the pressure for large-scale land acquisitions is likely to continue even as biofuel policies are refined. As you review the materials for this week, I'd like you to consider the causes and consequences of large-scale land acquisitions and the role that you play in them as a consumer. Then, assuming the role of a policymaker, consider how you might craft policies that avoid fueling dispossession and deforestation. Are protected areas and conservation projects the answer? Or is that merely a form of green grabbing that further contributes to the global pattern of land consolidation? I look forward to hearing your ideas and how we can address these global dilemmas.